Hello, how are you doing?
Very
well, thank you.
Good. We're going to just wait a few minutes before we get going to allow other people to get in.
Yeah, totally cool. Absolutely fine. I'm a couple of minutes early anyway.
Hello, everyone. Hilary, that wasn't, it was the fact that we were muted. So we are here now. Hi, welcome everybody. I think it's just 12 o'clock, isn't it? Should we give a minute or two for people to come in?
Yeah, I think we'll just give it a minute or two. If you wouldn't mind muting yourselves, and if you want to choose to only see us, I think you can have the choice of doing that on your screens. But yeah, if you just mute yourselves, that would be great. And then we'll get going in a minute or two.
Okay.
Okay, I think we should get going so that you can all get on with the rest of your days. Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome. It's fabulous to see you, if not in real life, then kind of in person, virtually. All these people that we've been emailing and connecting with over the last year or so. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Samantha Simmons, and we are delighted to welcome you to our first Meet the Press event. We're really excited to share some of our insights and expertise over the next probably 45 minutes or so. Lauren and I will probably talk for around 25 minutes, and then there will be an opportunity for you guys to ask questions as well. So either jot them down now and ask them later, or you can put them in the chat box as well. So a little bit about me, first of all. I'm a journalist and broadcaster. I've been a journalist for more than 20 years now. I started off as a producer at the BBC News Channel, where I was working for a few years, and booking guests such as yourselves was very much part of the key role that I did there. And then I became a reporter, where I got to interview the experts, which was fabulous. And then I moved to Sky as a presenter, where I was for about 10 or 11 years. So day in, day out, hour in, hour out, I was interviewing the experts on whatever the key stories of the day were. And then a few years ago, I left Sky, and I've been back at the BBC now as a presenter on Politics London, and also on BBC World News, which is the international channel that you get when you're on holiday, and also on the BBC News channel as well. So that's a little bit about me and my background. Lauren, tell us a bit about you.
So I'm Lauren Libbert, and I came into journalism through a bit of a different type of route. I started off as a lawyer, actually, and actually left the day I qualified because I didn't like it. It wasn't creative enough. Went travelling and decided when I came back that I wanted to pursue my passion as a writer. And I started work at Take a Break, which at the time was the best-selling women's weekly. I think it was selling over 1.6 million copies a week, which is unheard of now. And I worked my way up from Take a Break. I moved over to celebrity magazines such as Closer. I ended up editing Top Santé, the health and beauty magazine, which still exists, and New Woman, a magazine which sadly no longer exists, which was a fabulous women's glossy monthly. And then I had my children and went freelance, and for the last 15 or so years, I have been writing for the national newspapers, for magazines, for online sites, and just been interviewing people and experts for a long time now. So I'd say about 25 years. So we decided to set up Find Your Expert because we know what it's like to be looking for experts all the time. And this is something that we decided was much needed by journalists.
Yeah, I don't actually really book the guests as much as Lauren does, but I obviously interview people. And it became a frustration for me that on a lot of stories, we would use the same faces, the same voices. Journalists, which we'll talk about a little bit later, can be a bit lazy and won't necessarily search for new people. And we wanted to give people out there who do have expertise and want to get their voices heard the opportunity to do so in a quick, easy way. So we set up the directory, and it's evolved from the directory to the Facebook group, as you guys all know. And we're having a lot of success, which is fabulous. And we're so pleased that we're managing to amplify your voices and lots of other people's as well. So as I said, the aim of this session is to give you some tips as to how to get your voice heard even more in the press than you are doing at the moment. Really, given our backgrounds and our expertise, some of it you may already know, hopefully lots of things you don't. But if there's anything you want to ask us or find out more about, please, as I say, do ask us a little bit more later on. So let's get started. Lauren, first of all, what does it take to be an expert? Where do you want to feature as an expert? Is that important?
So I think of it as, sorry, just 1 minute. I'm just trying to move the slide on. Just bear with me 1 second. Sorry.
You talk.
So I always think of it as questions that experts need to ask themselves. So the first question, which would be on our slide, is where do you want to feature as an expert? So sometimes when you are an expert, you might just think, I'm going to have this scattergun approach and I'm going to want to appear everywhere, and I'm just going to see what I can do. And I think actually the best way is to think about ideally where you would like to feature. So is it online, print, newspapers, magazines? Do you want to appear more on television? Do you want to go on the radio? What sections of the newspapers would you like to target? If you're a psychologist working in health, would you want to would you want to target the health editors of the national newspapers? If you're working in property, would it be the property editor of the Times? So the idea is that you really need to think about where you would like to feature. So start from what are your goals, and then get to know the publications that you would like to feature. So read around them, see the kind of interviews they do, see the experts that they interview, see the kind of content they're creating, and just get to know them and get familiar with the kind of pieces and the stories they do and the experts they recruit. So you know straight away where your expertise might come in.
How important is that, do you think, Lauren? Because it may be that a story comes up that would be relevant to our experts, but would be in a more mainstream publication, so they might not know those journalists.
So the idea is that the next step, once you've actually decided where you would like to feature and possibly honing yourself down to maybe 4 or 5 areas, you have to think about, can you build a relationship with the journalists working on these publications? So the idea is knowing, something like joining Find Your Expert is obviously a great first step, because, suddenly you have access to lots of different journalists. But you have to really think about where your journalists are and how you can contact them. So the first place to do it is social media. Journalists are all over social media. We use Twitter a lot. We can use LinkedIn. We don't tend to use Instagram to find people. So it's either Twitter or LinkedIn, I would say, or just Googling. So I would say connect with journalists that you have found on your publications, who are working on your programs. Connect with them, engage with their work, like, comment, share. I would say as well, create some kind of Excel spreadsheet as well, writing down the features editors of the different publications, the commissioning editors, and writing down their name, their email address, and keeping a note of it. And when you're posting an event, or you've been to somewhere, or you've got something to say about what's going on, then tag them. Just tag them into it. I always find it really useful when I see people tagging me in an area that actually I write about, because I actually find, oh, that's really interesting. They're going on, we've got Tara here, who's a psychologist, and she often writes about her walk and talk events, and that often prompts me to think about ideas, the new ways that therapists are meeting people and helping people. So it's all about just getting journalists sort of into your conversations. And also, once you do appear, let's just say that you are successful, you do appear in an article, you are interviewed, make sure you shout about it and tag them in it, so they know that you are an expert that is available and interviewable. And I think that's really important. I would say we will come to pitching a little bit just further down, but you can also, once you've got their email address, send them a pitch. You can actually email people and say, look, I've got this great idea, I'm doing this new thing, or I've seen this happening, or I've noticed this in my practice, or there's something going on in my area of expertise, and pitch it to them. And what I would say is probably don't do that more than once a week, because I think that's something, if you're doing it more than once a week, it does appear a little bit like hounding, which journalists don't particularly like.
I think also keep it brief. I don't think you want to write reams and reams, because really anyone's only got time to kind of read the top sentence or two. But we've already got lots of experts in the directory who are really good at putting themselves forward. For example, Natalie, who's our style expert, she's really good at pushing herself on Twitter and saying, if you need a comment on this story, then contact me. We've also got Sarah Davison, who's our kind of divorce expert, who's really good at doing that. So people who are very present on social media. Vanessa Cuddiford, who talks about public speaking, she's always on LinkedIn, always posting videos. And the thing with these things is that they're all that, they're there 1 minute, they're gone the next, so that you may feel like you may be overloading yourself on social media and overexposing yourselves. But the chance of you being seen by the same person, are not all that great. So it's worth carrying on doing that.
I would also say that whenever I'm writing a feature, it's always good to have experts in mind who you will go to for certain subjects. And the great thing about just sort of being more present, lifting your head above the parapet a little bit, and unfortunately or fortunately these days, this is on social media, is that you're in the journalist's mind eye. So whenever I get a request for a style expert, yes, I think of Natalie. When I think of any issues around divorce, yes, I think about Sarah Davison, our divorce coach. About when I think about corporate stress and burnout, Kelly Swingler, as Samantha just said, Vanessa Cuddiford when it comes to presenting, or education topics, we've got the wonderful Rachel Vech. So I feel that actually knowing people's names, knowing their area of expertise is really important. Psychology, Marianne Trent. So you're sort of carving a niche into the journalist's mind, the more you're lifting your head above the parapet.
So I'll tell you a little bit as well about how at the BBC producers find experts. There's first of all a database, that sort of a BBC-wide database that has some names in, but it's definitely useful to be on that. So if you ever are on a program with the BBC on radio, or if you quoted online, or if you're on TV, do make sure you mention to the journalist, oh, I know you have a database and I'd love to be on there, happy to be on there, and they may add you to that. They also have their own programs which they're kind of secretive about, and they keep those locked so that other people can't see all their contacts. But again, worthwhile being on there. And other newsrooms will be the same. They'll have a sort of general database. So worth pointing out to the producer that books you, I'm happy to be called again. So please do contact me if you want to. But I think one of the key areas is social media. When a story breaks, they'll often look on Twitter for somebody who's written about that story or commented on that story. So it's really useful to use a hashtag. For example, what's happening in Ukraine, or if you want to comment on the Johnny Depp trial or the Wagatha, what are they calling it? The Wagatha Christie
Yes.
trial at the moment, which,
fascinating.
is entertaining lots and lots of people at the expense of
friendship falls apart.
to former friends. So it's worth doing that as well, making sure that you tweet with a hashtag with your contact details. We'll talk about being easily findable as well, probably a little bit later, but if you want to be contactable, like Natalie is great at responding on Twitter. She's always got her Twitter open and she's always responding. If we tag her in a tweet, which we try and do with as many as you if we can for relevant stories, please make sure you respond to that tweet so they know you're available. You might not want to have your DMs open. You might not want people contacting you directly, but make sure that you've got somewhere, even if it's in your bio, where they can contact you if you want them to be able to do that. And as we were saying, shout out about your successes. I interviewed somebody on my program the other day about the menopause. Before I'd even interviewed her, she'd followed me on Twitter. She'd tweeted me and the program before she was even on it. She recorded her clip of herself just off a TV screen. It wasn't, high quality or anything. She's put it on LinkedIn. She's put it on Facebook. She's put it on social media. I mean, this lady is very, very on it. And again, it might feel uncomfortable. You might feel like you're over self-promoting, but I suppose that's the name of the game. That's kind of what you're all here for, and what this journey is about, that you need to put yourself forward so that people can find you and you can be findable.
Thank goodness our slides are now working. So one of the next things is just thinking about, do you have an eye on the news and what's current? Before I do any pitch to any commissioning editors, I'm currently doing lots for the Telegraph, and I do some for the Mail as well. They won't really consider a pitch unless I've got some kind of hook. Why am I pitching that to them today? What is going on? So I think it's just, if you are wanting to appear as an expert, just have a look at the headlines of the newspapers online, look at what's trending on Twitter. On the right side of Twitter, there's a trending bar. Just look at what people are talking about. Obviously celebrity stories are great hooks, and the idea is that think about where you can insert yourself into that space. So, for example, the Matthew Hancock affair, is all about relationships and affairs, and it would have been great, Marianne Trent, relationship psychologist, getting out in there, trying to give her commentary. When we're looking at anniversaries as well, for example, an anniversary of Princess Diana, for example, that might be a good time to insert yourself as a grief expert. It's really important to also keep abreast of what people are watching on television and Netflix, and those are also really good ideas for stories. Even if it feels like it's not quite your remit, it might spin off some ideas. So things like Married at First Sight Australia or Anatomy of a Scandal, these are great. As journalists, we use this all the time to find ideas and to find stories. You're basically trying to be part of the conversation, is actually knowing what the conversation is. So being current and being topical is really important. It's not only about getting your voice out there, but it's about being very conscious of the news and where you fit into it.
And even being sometimes ahead of the news. So I also present a business program, and there's a lady who's been on quite a few times, and her expertise is the oil markets. And she messaged me on Twitter, we follow each other, saying she was aware that there was going to be talk about the EU discussing, sanctions against Russia with their oil. And she said, I'm available if you want me to comment on this. And I came in the next day to present the program. The producer said, we've got this lady on. And I said, she messaged me. And she said, yes, she messaged me. So she'd messaged everybody in the team separately, and it had worked. It might not work all the time, but it worked for her to get herself on there. So again, it might feel a bit uncomfortable and cringy, but if you're ahead of a story, if even before the day that something's coming up that's on the news agenda, like the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, we knew that was coming up. Like the Met Gala, we know that we're going to need a comment on that, because there'll be that, the BAFTAs, the Oscars, if you're entertainment, these things are in the diary that we all know about. So again, good to be ahead of those things. So Lauren, let's talk a bit more about, we've talked about the need to pitch. How do you even go about doing that then?
So pitching is a bit of an art, I have to say, because the temptation when you're pitching is to just write about everything that you know, or write about what you can say, and then sending it off and hoping it will land. The art of pitching is it should just be one paragraph, because journalists, as we know, are quite time conscious, time precious. And so the idea is that you start off with a very, very attention grabbing headline. So, you can look at the headlines on newspapers, online articles, and see it's just one line, and it's just got to really pull you in. There's nothing like an attention grabbing headline. And then you just got to do a few sentences on what the story would be, your expertise and background, and then just put your contact details and availability. So an attention grabbing headline, it can be something about, I don't know, if you're writing about menopause, why menopause makes women snore, or the real reason we're all getting ill right now, or what to do. For example, we've got a crisis, haven't we, in the dentists at the moment. No one can get an NHS dentist, and certainly in certain parts of the country. What to do if you can't get a dentist appointment. I don't know, if there's been an affair, why men in power will always stray. Just think of that sort of very catchy headline, putting in what the story would be about, putting in your expertise, and making sure that you are available for contact. The worst thing in the world is to say that you're available, and then we try to get hold of you and you're not available. I had this fantastic expert come to me last week. She'd just written a book called, her name's Dr. Gilmore, she'd just written a book called The Incredible Teenage Brain, and she was talking about how to get teenagers to study when they're completely disengaged. Obviously, I mean, I don't think she knew that I have teenagers, one of whom is completely disengaged, but obviously we are heading towards exam period. It was a perfect email to me, because because we're heading towards exam period. We're all talking about exams, or certain section of society are talking about exams and how we're going to get teenagers over the line. And straight away, I emailed her and said, oh my gosh, are you around? I think I could really do a good pitch on this. And then by the next day, we were already chatting, and the piece is going to go into the Telegraph this Saturday. So I think that's really important. I mean, she'd obviously written a book, so she had lots to say on this subject, but there's many of you who haven't written a book yet and will still have lots to say on this subject. Is there something that you're specializing in your practice, and you can see something coming up that would be really good? So you just need to say, you know, this is happening, this is what I can do, and these are my contact details and availability. I think that's how it works.
Yeah, and I think it's very difficult, because I was saying, this lady who contacted me and the whole business team, she would have not received a response probably from 4 out of 5 of us. And I don't know how that would have made her feel, but I do know that that happens a lot, that you can approach journalists and you might not get a response. You might even respond to a journo request. You know, we do have it on our Facebook group as well, as lots of you will know. We put lots of journo requests on there, and there's often a very tight deadline. And I think it's a frustration that you may not hear back from that journalist, which is completely understandable. But Lauren, I don't know what your advice is for kind of dealing with that, because you're somebody who, you know, has to deal with the experts and get back to them or not, I suppose.
I think the key, and I actually would have the same advice for a journalist coming into this industry as I would have for an expert. We have to develop a really thick skin. I pitch all the time, and I literally don't hear back anything. And then I can pitch 3 weeks later, and then it's obviously a pitch that works, and they get back to me straight away and say, you know, can you do this by tomorrow or Friday or something? So I think the whole idea is that journalists are only interested in what they're interested in, and if it's just not interesting, then they will just move on, and they don't necessarily, I mean, I don't feel very proud of this, and I know we have talked about this a little bit in the Facebook group. I don't feel proud of this element of my profession, is that we're sort of too busy to do a courteous reply. We're too busy to say thank you but no thank you. I do feel we can, I certainly personally will do my best to always reply to people, but I know that if you're actually working on the newspapers, you have tunnel vision, and you're only working on what you're working on, and it does mean that often experts will just not be replied to. And I think the whole idea is to develop a thick skin. Just think, okay, that didn't land and I'm going to have to move on, but don't let it dishearten you, because that is the nature of this business. It is quite cutthroat, and you still have something to offer. They just don't want it that day, or they don't want you. They might have found someone else a couple of hours earlier. So I think it's just about moving on and just not letting it, just let it wash over you. I think it does take practice. But I think that's really important. And I think when you do put your head above the parapet, I have just said this before, but just make sure you only put your head up if you really can do it. Letting a journalist down once will stay with them, and it could actually potentially ruin the relationship.
Make sure as well that you are fully briefed on what you're going to be asked about, specifically if it's TV and radio and it's live, and you kind of can't say, well, hang on a minute, I don't really know about that. And because it does happen that occasionally I interview people, and they very occasionally they kind of can't really answer the key question. But usually a producer will do a briefing call with you to make sure that you are aware of the subject matter, to ask if there's anything specific you want to be asked. But journalists can always ask curveballs that you might not be able to ask. So, I mean, this isn't for this time, but there's certain techniques you can use for live interviews that can kind of get you out of a hole. But make sure you speak to the producer about the areas you're comfortable with, in case you're worried something that could come up and you're not prepared to talk about it, or you're not briefed about it. I mean, even when I interview our correspondents, I will often say, if a story's breaking, I'll say to the producer before they come on air, can they talk about this, that, and the other? It's just, this story's just dropped on the news agencies. And often they can't, and that's fair enough. But it's nice to, it's nice to give them a bit of warning. A lot of times you might not. So just something to be aware of. Another area when it comes to pitching is being prepared to tell your personal stories, isn't it?
Yeah, this is something we're actually really proud of at Find Your Expert. We share our experts' backstories in the blog on our site, which is the Expert Spotlight. Some of you will have already been featured on it. I mean, this humanises our experts, we like to think, and it gives them another dimension. But this is something that's actually a really, really big part of journalism. Journalists are always on the hunt for good case studies. And I don't know if this is something that maybe you can think about. You might not be comfortable in talking about your own personal story, but if it is relevant, and I know with some of you that it is relevant, that you came to your expertise because you had something happen in your own backstory that led you there. And I actually think this is a really good inroad in certain stories. So if you have to think about what would you be happy to talk about, so is your backstory part of the main reason why you became an expert? For example, you know, did you lose someone young and then you retrained as a grief expert, or did you choose not to have children and that's defined your career choice? Were you the geek at school who was bullied and then you went for a career in STEM and now you're a campaigner for more women in STEM? You know, I think it's something that experts should think about. I think we're always looking for that personal angle. I mean, I did a feature recently, I'm not sure if Kelly actually is in here, but with Kelly Swingler, who retrained, and she's now sort of a life coach who deals a lot with corporate stress. And we did a feature about the cost of living crisis and something that we phrased financial PTSD. And Kelly talked to me about the fact that she had financial PTSD when she got made redundant many years ago. And actually that was part of the reason why she became a life coach and wanted to work with people that were in positions of stress and financial stress. And I think that was a really good way in, because obviously she was selling herself in the article as somebody who was well equipped as an expert to deal with stress and corporate stress in particular, but it was her own backstory that led her to that position. And that was, for me, it's just like the perfect way you can get this synergy between your own personal story and your expertise. So I think that's I think it's a really, really important part. And I think you can do this in many ways. It can form part of your pitch. You could do a post on LinkedIn, which talks a little bit about the background behind you. Obviously, you could feature in our expert spotlight. But one thing I will say, because I write a lot, not a lot, I write some personal stories about my own experience. And sometimes we can go a little bit too far, or sometimes we don't think enough about, because obviously people out there are quite critical. You know, one of the classic journalist sort of comments is never ever read the Daily Mail comments. If you feature in an article in the Daily Mail, never ever just switch it off, or never look at it. And I unfortunately have featured a lot in Daily Mail pieces, certainly in the past. And I think you really have to think whether you want your personal story out there before you commit. So just really think about it, because you wouldn't want your children, for example, stumbling across something that you weren't quite comfortable with. I'm looking at Samantha a little bit, because we did do a piece a while ago on children watching porn together. So I think you really have to do that, and only put your head again above the parapet in this area if you are committed, because a journalist would hate it if you were going to do it and then you pulled out.
And also just be aware that when you do a pitch, I mean, this has happened also when we've kind of discussed stories, because I've written, as Lauren says, with Lauren, a few personal pieces, and, you know, journalists can sometimes push for more, and, you know, be prepared to know where your red lines are in terms of telling your personal story, and what you might be, as Lauren said, comfortable or uncomfortable with, and what could be, you know, my kids have just started Googling me and themselves and have come up with some funny headlines, including one in which I wrote about how my kids prefer my husband, and my middle child found it the other day and he was very offended. And I said, oh, I didn't mean it. He goes, but it's not true. I said, oh, I know, it's fine, don't worry. It was quite funny.
Yeah, you do have to be careful. And you're right, sorry, I've just literally looked at the chat, and Beverly, who's here, Beverly Jones, you also were a crucial case study in that piece on financial PTSD. So again, that's another example, isn't it, about
Bunmi, we've
Yes.
Bunmi's highlighted her story as
Yes,
well.
Bunmi
Yeah.
is actually very, very good at that.
Bunmi's on here.
Yeah, she writes, she does a lot of posts, looks at what's obviously going on in the news, and then tries to connect it to her expertise and her story. Bunmi is a food addiction coach, so and has come from that kind of background. So I think that's really important. If you are willing to do that, then do it, and hopefully, you know, a journalist will help it to stick.
That's kind of it for our nuggets, and we have got some questions already on the chat, so I'm going to put those now because I can't see them. So Bev has asked, do you add a photo in the pitch? And also Marianne has asked, do you write a pitch in the subject line, as in the word pitch, and then your headline, or just the headline?
So I think in the actual subject line, I would actually write the headline. So you want everything to be as engaging as possible. And I think if you just write pitch, then I think that's quite difficult. Just 1 second, sorry.
Just trying to get rid of the slides. Come on.
The slides have gone on my screen.
Yes, we were just trying to get rid of them to go full screen, so we're not talking about them anymore. If the slides have gone, that's fine.
Okay.
But you can see us, yeah?
Yeah. Sorry, we were just talking about yeah, you could write pitch and then the headline. I think that's really important, because I get lots of emails, and if the headline is interesting in the subject line, I mean, how sad is that I won't even go down into the main body of the email if it doesn't attract me. So if you just write pitch, colon, and then your headline, and then make sure that your email, as I say, is no more than a paragraph long with the headline on the top. I always bold up the headline on the top. And then just do one paragraph, and just obviously you'll have your signature with your contact details, and that's really important. But the idea is to, like everything in the media, the idea is to grab attention from the get-go.
Oh, sorry, Marianne says, would you write pitch and the headline? So as in to tag that it's to tag that what the email is a pitch.
I would just put pitch, colon, then your headline. And obviously you don't want it to go on too long, but I think that actually helps you to shape the headline anyway, because it should be quite short and succinct. Do you add a photo in the pitch? I wouldn't, but then I suppose I'm only working in print and online publications. You might want to do it if you're pitching for TV or radio, would you think?
I think it can't hurt. I think if you've got one, I think it's a nice idea, to show what you look like, but I don't think it's an absolutely vital thing. But I think if you've got one and you're happy to add it, then I don't think that's a bad thing to do. I
mean, experts are rarely pictured in pieces. They will only be pictured in pieces if they have this personal hook. So personal story, they will probably want a picture. But if you're just featuring as an expert giving advice, it's quite unusual to have an actual picture of an expert. They usually just go for the case study pictures.
Marianne's asking if you can get a copy of the slides. Yes, you can. If you just email us, we will send you a copy of the slides. Any other questions? I think that's hang on. Yeah, Bunmi said your main focus is TV. Is there a different approach? I think it's hard to pitch to TV like you can for papers, because it's not so, unless there's a story, as I was saying, that's relevant to the day, like the lady who was emailing me about oil. She was following me on Twitter. I followed her back so she could DM me. If you've got those people in your contact list who are going to be asking about a story that's specific, for example, at Bunmi, I think we talked on Facebook about when Kim Kardashian said she'd lost an extreme amount of weight for the Met Gala to fit into that dress, and that was all over the place. If you've got journalists who are going to be talking about that story, for example, maybe on 5 Live or LBC, and people and you've got contacts with them, then I would suggest definitely getting in touch with them, because if you've got someone being offered on a plate, then they'll possibly go for that. So I would definitely suggest that, but it's harder to write a specific story. If you had a business that was set up through a very personal story that you think would be good for television or radio, and again, you have contacts, then definitely you could do a pitch. I don't know how easy it would be to get that translated, because most television is, certainly in the TVI work, is reactive rather than sort of pre-planned. But you might be able to get on a business story or a business program. We also obviously have business programs, so it's a slightly different approach. But I think if you can be proactive in the way that we've talked about on social media with people's emails or whatever contacts you have, then that's definitely a way forward with regards to breaking stories or a story that is going to be in the news that day or the next day. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and speak. We haven't muted you, so you can so you can ask us if you'd like to.
Do you need to include personal? Okay, so Susan, you've asked a question. Do you need to modify your biog on the Find Your Expert site to include personal stories? Any tips? Yes, I would say if you think it would be really useful for people to know where you've come from as an expert, I would say that is really useful, because journalists are searching all the time. They are looking at the bios. So I think that would really be helpful. So definitely just go in, edit your listing and write, if you want to just sort of write a little bit at the beginning about how you came into it. We always review it anyway before we publish. So I think that's a really, really good idea. Yes.
Gina's asking, if you haven't already built up a list of journalist expert contact details, how do you best recommend finding the right contact details? Is LinkedIn an appropriate channel?
Yeah, I also find that on Twitter, so if you just do a search and let's just say you find, I'm just going to pick somebody, a features editor of Glamour, for example, and you follow them on Twitter. I don't know if you know, but when it looks at them, when Twitter recommends people, you are then recommended, oh, here's the commissioning editor of Hearst magazine, and so it's actually really useful to just copy. Once you start doing that on Twitter will start throwing up people to you. You're like, oh yes, the BBC editor, I'll give them a follow, and that one. So actually it's really helpful if you just start following a few people. So you probably need like a handful of names. And then also, you could also like even look at my, Samantha as well, you've got a much bigger Twitter following than me, but just look at my Twitter. I mean, all my Twitter is full of journalists. If you just look at all the people who follow me and I follow, it's predominantly journalists. You'll probably find every single commissioning editor in my following. So it's almost like just start that ball rolling. I mean, LinkedIn as well, it's a similar kind of thing. If you follow somebody on LinkedIn, you'll be thrown up with more examples of people to follow. And then you end up with all those kinds of people in LinkedIn. So it does take time to do this. So I would say when you're having a quiet day, just spend a morning doing it. It's probably good to be quite targeted rather than just doing it randomly. And then you'll have all these people. So every time you write a post on LinkedIn, you'll have all these people seeing it. And that's really, really useful. Just remember, journalists are always looking for ideas and always looking for stories. You might feel like you're always chasing journalists, but actually it is the other way around. You probably just don't realize it, but it is the other way around.
And in terms of being able to message them directly on Twitter, it's hard because unless they follow you back, you can't DM them. But if you call a newsroom, which you can find just Google like the Independent or the Daily Mail, and a general news number will come up, or switchboard number, and you can just ask for that journalist's email address. I think they'll generally give it out to you. Just say, oh, I'm another journalist, whatever. Just say I'm an expert. I want to get hold of so-and-so, whoever it is. When I've called up newsrooms to get journalists' details for whatever reason, I've generally been given the email address. And then once you've got that standard, if it's, mine is whatever, samantha.simmons@bbc.co.uk, that's generally the format for that organisation's email. So it's not that difficult, just a little bit of detective work, really.
Marianne has asked about, can you recommend other channels to find journalists? Did that answer your question, Marianne, or did you want to know more? I mean, please do unmute if
Yes.
Okay, I was just wondering because I just wanted to make sure. I mean, it is, we are we are out there, we are findable, but I think it does take time to build up a list of contacts. And, you know, I think it's just really important, as I say, that once you've got your list of contacts, and I said it in the it's just be brave, pitch. You know, it's just, and also, you know, at the end of the day, if you're pitching, I mean, Marianne, you do sleep, and let's just say that you've noticed something going on in your practice, that you've noticed that more people are coming in with kids of a certain age, or, you know, that people are struggling, or maybe COVID has left some kind of after effect. Tell me about it. Tell me what you've noticed anecdotally going on in your
give
practice.
Lauren all your stories.
Or, I mean, if it's not me, it'll be another, you know, as and see, you know, who's writing about your stuff. And, you know, I'm always interested in we're really interested in stats and PRs, and we do have some PRs in here. What PRs are really good at is doing, you know, commissioning their own surveys and getting new stats. You know, it can take a lot of resource to do that, but journalists love a good stat, you know, so but if you don't have a stat as such, because you're just an independent expert working on your own, but you're noticing things going on in your practice, I as a journalist can go away and find some stats to support it. You don't have to do that, that's my job, but you just tell me what you're finding interesting, what's going on. We want to know what's going out there. Why are people coming to you? What's their stories? What have you noticed? So please, you know, if you do notice anything, just find the right journalist and offer it.
Just ask everyone on the chat, if you've got any more questions, do let us know. Otherwise, we'll let you go.
Thanks
for
coming, Kelly. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Kelly.
We will send out the so we'll send out the slides to anyone who wants them. You know, Samantha and I are also, you know, we're very proud of Found Your Expert, and we're really happy to have you all on board, and I hope you're finding it really useful. If you do have any pointers for us, and I'm sure you will do, you know, things that you would like to see more of, you know, things that you feel that we're not doing, or if you just want to mine us when we've got a spare half an hour, you know, just feel free to email us and we can put in some time for that. But yeah, and thanks, Natalie.
Oh, you got your hand up. We haven't seen that one.
Where's the hand up? Yeah. How's that? She wanted to say hello. She had a hand up. But thank you very much for attending. Really appreciate it, and keep doing what you do.
Thanks a lot. Nice to see you all.
Take care. Have a good rest of the day. I hope the sun shines.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.